March 18th, 2008, 3:47 a.m., Philadelphia. Maya Rodriguez opens her eyes. She's on her couch. The TV is muted. She doesn't remember lying down. She doesn't remember falling asleep. The last thing she remembers is putting away groceries 8 hours ago. Then she sees it. The front door. Open. Not broken into. Unlocked. The chain hanging loose. The deadbolt turned like someone had carefully, deliberately, opened it from the inside. Maya lives alone. She's meticulous about locks. Obsessive, even. So, who opened the door? She checks the apartment. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed. Except her keys, moved from the hook by the door to the coffee table. Except the metallic taste in the air. Except the ache in her legs like she'd been walking. She'd lost 8 hours of her life. And during those 8 hours, her body had been doing things she couldn't remember. This wasn't the first time it would happen. And when she finally discovered the truth, when she found the notebook hidden in her own computer, it would force her to ask a question no one should ever have to ask. What if I'm not the only person living inside my head? Comment below if this sounds like a nightmare, and smash that subscribe button because what Maya finds in apartment 2B will make you question your own memory. Maya Rodriguez had built her late 20s around routine and order. She worked as a legal assistant at a small firm in Center City, Philadelphia, took the same bus every morning at 7:15, and bought coffee from the same bodega on Chestnut Street. Her studio apartment on the third floor of a converted row house was modest but meticulously kept. Books arranged alphabetically. Bills paid 2 weeks early. Leftovers labeled with dates she actually followed. This wasn't obsessive behavior. It was survival instinct. Maya had grown up in a household where chaos reigned, where her mother's unpredictable moods could turn a Tuesday afternoon into a crisis. She'd learned early that controlling her environment meant protecting her peace. By the time she moved to Philadelphia after college in 2004, she'd perfected the art of measured living. No drama. No surprises. Just the quiet satisfaction of a life that made sense. March 2008 had been unremarkable until that Wednesday night. She'd left work at her usual time, stopped at the grocery store for ingredients to make vegetable soup, and arrived home around 6:30 p.m. She remembered unlocking all 3 locks, remembered the satisfying click of the deadbolt. She'd put on a Jill Scott album and started unpacking the groceries. The kitchen in her studio was barely more than a galley, 4 feet of counter space, a 2-burner stove, a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. She'd been chopping celery when she felt the first wave of dizziness. It came on suddenly, a tilting sensation, like the floor was shifting beneath her feet. She'd set down the knife and gripped the counter edge. The feeling passed after a moment, and she dismissed it as low blood sugar. She'd skipped lunch that day. That was her last clear memory before darkness swallowed the evening whole. When Maya finally convinced herself to check the apartment that night, after locking the door, after standing frozen in her entryway for 10 full minutes, she found everything seemingly untouched. Her purse sat on the small table by the door, wallet inside, cash still there. Her laptop remained closed on the desk. The vegetables she'd bought were still scattered across the kitchen counter, the celery half chopped, the knife where she'd left it. The only thing different was her keys. She always hung them on the hook by the door. Now they sat on the coffee table next to the couch where she'd woken. She made herself inventory everything twice. Nothing missing, nothing moved except those keys. And the door. Always. There was the door, which she'd found standing open like an invitation or a warning. Maya tried to reconstruct the lost hours logically. Maybe she'd felt ill, laid down on the couch, and in some half-asleep state, opened the door for air. But that didn't explain the locks. She'd have to deliberately turn the deadbolt, unhook the chain. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat on her couch with every light blazing, watching the door as if it might swing open again on its own. When dawn finally broke, and traffic sounds began filtering up from the street below, Maya felt a small measure of relief. Daylight made everything seem less threatening. She showered, dressed for work, and tried to convince herself it had been a one-time glitch. But deep in her chest, beneath the rationalizations, she felt something else. A cold certainty that she wasn't remembering something important, something that happened in those 8 missing hours, something that wanted to be forgotten. Maya made it 5 days before it happened again. 5 days of hypervigilance, checking the locks obsessively, barely sleeping, jumping at every sound in the hallway. She'd almost convinced herself the Wednesday incident was an anomaly when Sunday evening arrived and erased that fragile comfort. This time, she'd been watching television, a Law and Order rerun, something comforting in its predictability. She remembered the episode clearly, the one where the victim's twin sister turns out to be the real murderer. She remembered watching the detectives make the arrest. And then, nothing. When consciousness returned, she was standing in her small bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. The bathroom light was off. She was standing in complete darkness, but her eyes had somehow adjusted. She could make out her own silhouette in the mirror, a darker shadow against the blackness. Her right hand gripped the edge of the sink so tightly her knuckles ached. When she finally reached for the light switch, the sudden brightness made her gasp. She checked her watch. 11:23 p.m. She'd lost nearly 2 hours. When she walked back into the main room, her heart already sinking with dread, she found exactly what she'd feared. The front door wasn't just unlocked, it was standing wide open, all the way open this time, the hallway light spilling across her threshold. And on the floor just inside the doorway sat her sneakers, the ones she'd been wearing, placed neatly side by side, laces still tied. Maya's hands shook as she pulled the door shut and engaged all the locks. The sneakers she'd apparently removed. When? Why? Sat on the floor like evidence of a crime she couldn't remember committing. She picked them up slowly, examining them. The soles were clean. No dirt, no scuff marks. Nothing to indicate she'd been walking outside. This couldn't be stress. This was something else. Something wrong with her brain, her memory, her basic ability to know what she was doing with her own body. Maya sat back down on the couch and tried to breathe steadily. She'd heard of fugue states, psychological conditions where people lose chunks of time. But those happen to people with severe trauma, dissociative disorders, serious mental illness. She'd never had any of that. Monday morning, Maya called her primary care physician's office the moment they opened. The receptionist could hear the barely controlled panic in her voice and somehow found an appointment for that same afternoon. Dr. Patterson had been Maya's doctor for 3 years, a calm, methodical woman in her 50s who never rushed through appointments. Maya sat in the examination room and explained everything. The lost time, the open door, the sense of having been somewhere or done something she couldn't recall. Dr. Patterson listened carefully, asking questions about medications, alcohol use, drug use, sleep patterns, and stress levels. She performed a basic neurological exam and found nothing obviously wrong. But she didn't dismiss Maya's concerns. She ordered blood work to check for deficiencies, thyroid problems, anything metabolic that might cause blackouts. She wrote a referral to a neurologist who could order an MRI and EEG. In the meantime, Dr. Patterson said gently, I want you to keep a detailed log. Write down everything you eat, every medication you take, what time you go to bed, what you're doing before these episodes occur. Patterns help us identify causes. Maya left the office with paperwork and requisition forms and a small, cold stone of fear sitting in her stomach, because she'd started to notice something Dr. Patterson hadn't asked about. Both times, the lost time had occurred in the evening. Both times, she'd been alone. And both times, right before the darkness swallowed her memory, she'd felt that strange dizziness. What if next time, she didn't wake up safely inside her apartment? The blood work came back normal. Perfect, actually. Dr. Patterson called personally to tell her that all her levels were exactly where they should be. Maya didn't know whether to feel relieved or more frightened. At least a medical explanation would have given her something concrete to treat. The neurologist appointment wasn't for another 3 weeks. In the meantime, Maya did exactly what Dr. Patterson suggested. She kept meticulous records. She bought a small notebook and logged everything. Time she woke up, what she ate, coffee intake, hours at work, evening activities. She also made changes. She stopped drinking coffee after noon. She forced herself to eat lunch. She set alarms on her phone for every 2 hours in the evening, and she installed a chain lock that required conscious effort to unlatch. For 9 days, nothing happened. No lost time, no open doors, no strange awakenings. Maya began to hope that whatever had been wrong was resolving on its own. Then came the third incident, and with it, the discovery that changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday evening in late March. Maya had come home from work, made herself dinner, and settled in to read. She remembered reaching chapter 8 of her mystery novel. She remembered the protagonist discovering a crucial piece of evidence. And then, the familiar tilt, the sideways slide of consciousness, and darkness. This time, when awareness returned, she was sitting at her small desk, her laptop open in front of her. The screen glowed blue-white in the dark apartment. She had no memory of walking to the desk, no memory of opening the computer. But there it was, awake and active. And she was logged into her email account. Her hand was resting on the mouse. Maya's heart raced as she looked at the screen. Her email inbox was open, but nothing seemed different. No new messages sent. She checked her browser history with shaking hands. Nothing new had been added. She checked the timestamps on her files, looking for anything recently opened or modified. That's when she noticed something strange. Her documents folder was open and expanded, and inside it, nested within a folder labeled Work Personal, was a file she didn't recognize. Notes, March.txt. The creation date read March 5th, 2008, the day after her first episode. The modified date was today, just minutes ago. Her hands trembled as she double-clicked it. The text document opened, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. Inside were 3 entries, each dated, each written in a plain clinical style. March 5th, woke on couch, 3:47 a.m., door was open, no memory. Check grocery receipt, last purchase, 6:34 p.m., lost approximately 9 hours. March 9, bathroom, 11:23 p.m., door open. Shoes by entrance, check TV guide, show started 9:30 p.m., lost approximately 2 hours. March 18th, desk, laptop open. Time now, 10:15 p.m. Reading started 8 p.m., lost approximately 2 hours. Maya stared at the entries, her mind struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. She hadn't written these. She had no memory of opening this file, no memory of typing these words. But they were accurate, terrifyingly accurate. Every detail matched what she'd experienced, which meant that during her blackouts, when she believed she was simply unconscious, she was actually awake, functional, aware enough to turn on her computer, open a document, and record what was happening to her. She was documenting her own episodes, creating evidence of her missing time, and then forgetting she'd done it. There was a part of her consciousness that operated separately from her waking self, a part that remained aware during the blackouts, that took notes, that unlocked doors and removed shoes, and did things she had no memory of doing. Maya didn't sleep at all that night. Maya sat at her desk until dawn, reading and rereading those 3 entries. Every possibility led back to the same terrifying conclusion. There was a part of her consciousness that operated independently, a part that remained aware during the blackouts, that took notes, that made decisions she couldn't remember. The psychiatric term was dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. But that diagnosis seemed impossible. Died typically developed from severe childhood trauma. Maya's childhood had been chaotic, but not abusive. Nothing that would cause her psyche to fragment. Still, the evidence was undeniable. Someone was using her body while she wasn't there, and that someone had different priorities, different behaviors. Maya forced herself to think logically. What did she know for certain? The blackouts started in early March. They happened in the evening. They lasted between 2 and 9 hours. During them, doors were unlocked, objects were moved, and this text file was updated. And there was something else. Each entry ended with an estimate of lost time, but those estimates weren't calculations she could have made after regaining consciousness. To write, lost approximately 9 hours, you'd have to know both when the episode started and when it ended. She decided to run an experiment. That night, Wednesday, before settling in to watch television, Maya opened the text file herself. She added a new entry, March 19th, 9:30 p.m. This is Maya. If you can read this, if you're the one who's been writing these notes, I need you to write back. I need to understand what's happening. Why are you opening the door? Where do you go? Please help me understand. She saved the file and left the laptop open on her desk. Then she positioned herself on the couch, where she could see both the front door and the computer screen. She didn't know if this would work, but she needed answers. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Maya watched television, checked the time obsessively, glanced at the laptop screen every few minutes. She started to feel foolish. Maybe she'd hallucinated the whole thing. And then, at 12:47 a.m., the tilt came. The familiar sensation of the world sliding sideways. Maya tried to fight it, tried to keep her eyes open, tried to maintain consciousness through sheer force of will. But it was like trying to swim against a riptide. The last thing she saw was her living room, the blue glow of the television. When she came back, she was standing in front of the open door again. This time she didn't panic. This time, she walked directly to the laptop, her heart hammering, already knowing what she would find. The text file had been updated. Below her message from earlier that evening was a new entry. March 19th, 1:15 a.m. I don't have answers you'll understand. This started when you were exposed. The chemical was in the building. 2nd floor. Apartment. 2B. The door stays open because I'm checking, making sure it hasn't spread further. The shoes come off because I don't want to track contamination. I'm trying to protect you, even if you can't remember. I'm trying to protect everyone in this building. Don't go to apartment 2B. Don't ask questions about the previous tenant. Just trust that I'm keeping you safe. Maya read the message 3 times, each reading making her feel colder. Chemical exposure? Contamination? Apartment 2B? None of this made sense. The 2nd floor apartment had been empty for weeks, and chemical exposure would have shown up in her blood work, wouldn't it? Maya spent the rest of the night researching. She found nothing about chemical exposures in Philadelphia in early March. She looked up the previous tenant of apartment 2B. The last name listed was Vaughn. As dawn broke, Maya made a decision. She would go to apartment 2B. Maya waited until after work on Thursday to act. She'd spent the entire day distracted, barely able to focus. Her supervisor had asked twice if she was feeling all right. She'd lied and said it was allergies. She arrived home at 6:30 p.m., but instead of going up to the 3rd floor, she stopped on the 2nd floor landing. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit by overhead fixtures that needed new bulbs. Apartment 2B sat at the far end of the hall. Maya approached it slowly, her heart pounding. She tried the doorknob. Locked, of course, but apartment doors in old Philadelphia row houses were notoriously flimsy. Maya glanced down the hallway and retrieved a credit card from her wallet. She worked it into the gap between the door and frame. It took 3 tries, but the latch finally gave. The smell hit her first, something chemical and sharp, like ammonia mixed with something sweeter. It made her eyes water. She pulled her shirt collar up over her nose and mouth. The apartment was in chaos. The kitchenette was covered in glass containers, beakers, and jars that looked like they'd been purchased from a lab supply company. Many were empty, but some still held liquids in varying shades of yellow and brown. The labels were handwritten. Batch 3A, Synthesis Attempt 7, Base Compound plus Catalyst. Maya moved deeper into the apartment. The main room held a mattress on the floor, but it also held something else. A folding table covered in notebooks. Dozens of them, stacked haphazardly. Maya approached the table and picked up the nearest notebook. The handwriting inside was cramped and manic. The entries were dated, going back months. The writer, presumably Vaughn, had been documenting something. Maya flipped through pages, trying to make sense of the technical jargon, but interspersed with the science were stranger observations. The compound induces dissociation at low doses. Subject remains functional, but reports missing time. At higher doses, complete personality fragmentation. The secondary identity demonstrates protective behaviors, heightened awareness of environmental threats. Reversion occurs within 6 to 8 weeks in most cases. Maya's hands had gone numb. She flipped forward. March 1st, just days before her first episode. Synthesis chamber cracked during heating. Unknown amount of vapor released into ventilation system. Concentration should be low enough to be safe, but given compound's volatility, may have affected other units. Need to monitor. We'll watch building residents carefully. We'll intervene if necessary. The notebook fell from Maya's hands. She understood now. The chemical exposure her other self had mentioned wasn't a delusion. Vaughn had been synthesizing something experimental, and when the containment had failed, vapor had spread through the building's ventilation. Maya's apartment was directly above this one. She'd been breathing in trace amounts of some unknown compound for weeks, but Vaughn's notes suggested something else. Reversion occurs within 6 to 8 weeks. The effects weren't permanent. A sound from the doorway made her spin around. A man stood silhouetted in the entrance, thin, mid-30s, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked at her, then at the notebooks, then back at her face. "You're from 3B, he said quietly. "You've been experiencing the dissociative episodes." It wasn't a question. Vaughn knew. He'd been watching. "What did you do to me?" Maya asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "What was in that chemical?" Vaughn stepped into the apartment and moved to the window, his shoulders sagging. "It was supposed to help people," he said finally. "That's what they never understand. Every scientific advancement that goes wrong starts with someone trying to help." He began to explain, and Maya listened, her world shifting with every word. Vaughn had been a research chemist working on treatments for dissociative disorders. The compound he'd developed was designed to integrate fractured identities, but in testing, it had the reverse effect. It created secondary personalities in healthy subjects, protective alter egos that emerged during stress. "The company shut down the project when they realized the liability," Vaughn said. "They destroyed all samples. I kept enough to continue research. The synthesis was contained, or should have been. But the final heating stage, the chamber cracked. Not much vapor escaped, but enough. Enough to affect you." Maya felt cold. "Your notes said it reverses in 6 to 8 weeks. "It should," Vaughn said. "The compound has a short half-life. As it clears from your system, those pathways dissolve. Your consciousness should reintegrate naturally. The secondary identity will fade." "Should?" Maya caught the uncertainty. "There are no long-term studies. You're only the second person ever exposed outside controlled conditions. I was the first." Maya looked at him more closely, seeing the exhaustion, the paranoia. "Did yours reintegrate?" "Mostly." The word was heavy. "There are moments when I'm not entirely sure which version of myself I am. Memory gaps. But nothing like the active dissociation you're experiencing." "How long?" 4 months since my exposure ended. It gets better. Not perfect, but better." Maya felt her control slipping. "Is there anything that can speed it up?" Vaughn shook his head. "Time. 8 weeks from your first exposure, maybe less. We're almost at the 4-week mark. You're halfway through." 4 more weeks. 4 more weeks of lost time, of waking in strange positions. 4 more weeks of fundamental uncertainty, Why didn't you report this? Maya asked. Because there is no medical help, no antidote, no treatment. What would I tell them? I'd go to prison, the research would be destroyed, and you'd still have to wait it out, except now you'd be studied like a lab rat. He wasn't wrong. Medical science wouldn't have answers because they didn't know this compound existed. Maya walked to the window. What happens to her? To the other version of me? When she fades, does she know she's disappearing? Vaughn was silent. I don't know. The consciousness was never really separate. It was always you, just a different configuration. When it integrates back, it doesn't die. It just stops being distinct. I want copies of your notes, Maya said. Everything about this compound. If something goes wrong, I want doctors to have some idea what they're dealing with. Vaughn hesitated, then nodded. I'll make copies. But Maya, if this gets out, you'll lose your privacy. Your medical records will be flagged. Every blackout for the rest of your life will be scrutinized. Sometimes the only way to survive an accident is to not report it. He was asking her to be complicit. Maya understood that reporting wouldn't undo the exposure. 4 more weeks, she said. If I'm not better by then, all bets are off. That night, Maya found new messages in the text file, brief updates as the episodes grew shorter. By the 7th week, they stopped entirely. The neurologist appointment came and went. Maya canceled it. Vaughn moved out in June. Years later, Maya would still wonder about that other version of herself. She'd wonder if it was really gone or just dormant. She'd wonder if her instincts, choosing different routes home, double-checking locks, were echoes of that protective consciousness. But mostly, she learned to live with not knowing. She learned that certainty was a luxury, that the mind was stranger than she'd imagined. On quiet nights, she'd whisper to the darkness, "Thank you for keeping me safe." The door stayed locked. The blackouts never returned. And Maya Rodriguez learned that some mysteries would never be fully explained, only survived, documented, and finally, gratefully, left behind.